In 1985, my father was a 19-year-old soldier in the Greek army, serving in the paratrooper division. Military service was not just a duty, but a rite of passage for every young man in Greece. The camps were isolated, often nestled in remote parts of the countryside, surrounded by nothing but nature and silence. Life in the army was structured and disciplined. Days began before dawn and ended long after dusk. For my father, this period was a mix of rigorous training, mundane chores, and moments of introspection about the world outside the camp's fences. Military service, while mandatory, was a mixed bag of emotions. There was pride in serving one's country, yet a longing for the freedom and life they'd left behind. My father often spoke of the camaraderie among soldiers, a bond forged in the fire of shared experiences. Guard duty was an integral part of camp life. Every soldier took turns, and my father was no exception. The 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift was the most dreaded, a test of endurance against the cold and the challenge of staying alert. Those night shifts were bone-chillingly cold. My father would pace back and forth, trying to stay warm, his breath forming little clouds in the air. The silence of the night was occasionally broken by the distant howl of a wolf or the rustling of leaves. One night, during a 2 a.m. shift, my father noticed a dark figure approaching from afar. The sight was unusual and alarming. The isolation of the camp meant that any unexpected visitor could be a threat. Following protocol, my father challenged the figure. "Who goes there?" He called out, not once but twice. There was no response. His hand instinctively went to his weapon, ready to defend his post. As the figure drew closer, my father's heart pounded in his chest. The possibility of an intruder put him on high alert. He was prepared to sound the alarm, aware of the chaos it would cause in the dead of night. But as the figure came into the dim light, my father's fear turned to confusion. It wasn't an intruder but a fellow soldier, draped in a black blanket, returning from an unauthorized escapade. My father was now faced with a dilemma. Raising a false alarm was a serious offense in the military, punishable by additional days added to one's service. He knew the consequences could be severe. Torn between duty and camaraderie, my father hesitated. Reporting his fellow soldier could lead to severe punishment for both of them, but not reporting it was a violation of his duty. Despite the fear of punishment, my father chose not to report the incident. He returned to his booth, his mind racing with possible outcomes: reprimand, extra days in service, or worse. The next day was filled with anxiety. My father waited for his name to be called for penalties, but it never was. The day passed with no mention of the night's events. Later, my father learned that the officer in charge was a friend of the ghost soldier. The soldier had explained the situation, leaving out my father's involvement. There was an unspoken understanding between my father and the officer. No words were exchanged, but a nod acknowledged the situation and its silent resolution. My father was relieved. The incident, which could have escalated into a serious punishment, was quietly brushed under the rug. He had dodged a bullet, figuratively speaking. This experience taught my father a valuable lesson about judgment and discretion. It was a reminder that sometimes the right decision isn't the most obvious one. The incident also reinforced the bond between soldiers. In those secluded camps, away from the eyes of the world, there was a sense of brotherhood that often transcended rules. Looking back, my father often reflects on his time in the army. Guard duty, which seemed so mundane, was filled with moments of introspection and growth. His service, while mandatory, became a significant part of his life story. It was a time of learning, of understanding discipline and responsibility. When his time in the army came to an end, my father was a changed man. He had entered as a boy and left as someone who had faced and overcome challenges, both external and internal. Returning home was a surreal experience. The world he left behind had continued without him, and he had to find his place in it once again. Now, years later, these stories are a bridge to his past, a way for him to connect with his history and share it with others, like me. As I listen to these tales, I understand that his service was more than a duty to his country. It was a journey of personal growth and an integral part of the man he became.